Welcome back to continue our discussion looking at gang legislation, and the activities of the 100 Black Men of Tulsa. Joining me again is Marvin Blades, the president of the 100 Black Men of Tulsa, and also you work with Tulsa Public Schools Campus Police.
Yes, I do.
Now let's jump in. We were talking about legislation. Part of the legislation we were talking about was a requirement for teachers to report, and that it is a subjective reporting. They don't have to have any objective criteria. And the fact that there's no requirement for an education piece or a recertification or nothing like that, nor do they have to use the criteria that law enforcement may use to identify gang activity. Is there anything within this law that penalizes a teacher if they don't report? For instance, if it's found that they do have a person that was, and yeah, they did suspect it, but they didn't really think they needed to report it because they weren't quite sure. Is there any penalty component to the teachers?
Not actually directed to educators. Part of the same legislation, if a current gang member, particularly if an adult, is aware that a child is trying to get involved in gang activity and fail to report, that person can be charged with a crime.
So it's not only the teachers, but it's any adults within the child's environment or even a gang member themselves, that if they see that there is another person trying to enter the gang or become a part of this gang, if they don't report, then they can be held criminally liable?
Yes. To me, this is not good law. I don't care how you look at it. But it's set up where they're attempting to force young men in particular who have been involved in gang activity to not only report their activities, but a lot of activities are illegal. I mean, you're going to turn around and self-incriminate yourself just to obey this law. That's why we feel it's bad law.
Well, I was going to say, how realistic is the law? I mean, how many people are going to say, yes, I'm involved in criminal activity, so come get me, and I'm trying to recruit others? I mean, how realistic is even compliance?
It's not. It's not realistic at all, and again, that's why we say it's bad law, poorly written law.
Well, what's motivating it? I mean, what is causing the legislators to look at this level of law? Are there no laws on the books already that can address gang activity and criminal activity? Is there nothing there already, and they're just desperately trying to put something there?
There are laws. Title 21, the Oklahoma State Criminal Statute, has a portion that specifically talks about gangs. It defines gangs. It tells you how many people need to be in a gang to be defined as a gang, what type of crime is considered gang activity. That's already law. Okay. This new law that we see out here, I think it's driven by fear. We feel that people are starting to see gang members around every corner, underneath every nook and cranny. And because we see so many crimes that we consider to be gang related, that's why we see this type of legislation taking off, becoming so popular.
Okay. Well, as you talked about the crime being gang-related, are gang-related crimes and activities actually increasing, or are they about the same? Or, I mean, how is that occurring? Because, like I said, some of this is driven by fear, and we hear a lot about gang activity, but is that really on the rise? Is it any different from any activity that's not gang activity that's criminal?
No, I mean, if you look nationally, homicides are down. Here in Tulsa, actually, based upon the rate so far, we may come close to setting a record, particularly when it comes to gang-related homicides. But that's relative, because we can go to a city that, let's say, that's probably the same size as Tulsa, that's east, and their normal homicide rate is 100 plus. Here in Tulsa, we've never had a 100 homicides. Never.
Okay.
The most we ever had was 73. And because we in the mid-60s and our homicide rate when it comes to gang members is approaching such a high level, we're seeing a lot of paranoia out here.
Okay. Okay. So now with this then, do you find that gang activity sort of mirrors other criminal activity? I mean, in terms of its peaks and valleys, is there a certain time of the year that's worse than another time, summer versus fall versus winter, that you might tend to expect any kind of criminal activity, or is it more so gang activity at certain points?
If we're going to label crime as gang activity, we see probably a higher level of gang activity or gang-related crime in the months where we have good weather. Generally, we have some real cool weather, some real cold weather. Our overall homicide rate drops. That's normal because a lot of our crimes happen in the outdoors.
Okay.
So it's not unusual for it to drop in the winter and rise in the summertime. So anytime we have a streak of good weather, we seem to have a lot of homicides.
Okay, so in many respects, gang activity and in terms of criminal activity tends to mirror activity even if it's not gang related.
That's true.
For the most part.
It does. It does.
And it may be just our paranoia to feel that all of it must be gang related,
Yeah.
which it really isn't.
Yeah, that, and plus it's hard to predict homicides. You know, homicides are mostly crimes that just happen in the spur of the moment. A lot of them are not planned, a lot of them are not preconceived. They just happen. Not saying that they cannot be, planned, but the majority of them we have are just crimes of passion. And that doesn't necessarily mean between two people that are more romantically involved. It can just be two people that can get over something, get into it over something that's emotional.
Okay. Well, let me ask you too then about, once we've clarified that and how to really look at criminal activity, gang or otherwise, when we look back then at this legislation, what about an individual if they know of people in a gang and they may associate because that's their friend or that's their homeboy or homegirl, if they still call it that, or, do they get some type of penalty under this law for knowing and associating that way?
Well, again, if you read the law on its face, you can see how that could happen. You can get a overzealous investigator, and they can push you to the point where something like that can happen. A lot of people have to understand. Take me, for example. I have a first cousin that's a hardcore gangbanger, and I can't choose my relatives, but he is what he is. So to me, when you look at the law on its face, I can see where there can be a possibility of abuse just about the way it's written.
Okay. Well, what would you suggest? Because in our last segment, I want to come back and talk about intervention programs. But what would you suggest? What does the 100 Black Men really feel that should happen to this legislation? And what should we really do and focus on?
Well, first of all, we need to, because it's bad law, we need to stop it where it is. We already have laws on the book that, to me, clearly define what a gang is and clearly define what the penalties are. We can look at past experience, we can see that if we look at Oklahoma's execution rate, executing people do not stop capital crime. It don't.
Right.
I don't care how you look at it. It does not stop crime. Crimes of passion, you can't predict them. There's no way to predict from year to year or minute to minute or month to month how many homicides we're going to have. To me, because we have laws in place right now, what we should push is reinforcing what we got on the books and also push for early intervention.
Okay, and we're going to talk about intervention when we come back. And just one quick question. The current legislation is being proposed. Do you think it focuses more on one racial category compared to others? Because gang activity can be in any racial group.
Well, it does, because when you look at the law, it fails to talk about hate crimes. And hate crimes in Oklahoma is something to be considered, and I don't think this law considers that.
Okay. Okay. We'll take a really quick break and come back and look at interventions. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.